All right, welcome everyone. My name is Divine. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Divine Intervention Podcast. And in today's podcast, I'm going to be addressing a very basic topic, but a very high yield topic. To be completely honest with you, I don't know why I have not had a dedicated podcast on this particular topic for a long time. So I'm going to remedy that situation today. So what's this riveting topic I want to talk about? I want to talk about the Renin Angiotensin Aldosterone system. The Renin Angiotensin Aldosterone system. This is something that in some way, shape, or form you will see integrated into any of the USMLE or COMLEX exams. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, COMLEX 1, 2, or 3. And even when you go into clinical practice, this is one of those mechanisms and pathways that's really, really helpful to understand. You're just going to see it come up in many different ways. It's just one of those things, try as hard as you may to run away from it, is always going to keep waiting for you somewhere. So it's just something you kind of want to know, especially if you're going to something like internal medicine. It's probably a useful thing to understand. Okay, so what's the deal with the renin-angiotensin system? Well, really what it does is it regulates a bunch of stuff. It regulates blood volume, regulates your vascular resistance, regulates your, in a sense, let me say a little bit indirectly, regulates your cardiac output, your blood pressures. It just basically regulates a bunch of stuff, right? And if you look at the name of the system, it kind of tells you the big players, right? It says the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. Renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So the thing is, there are three things. There's renin, which is important. There is angiotensin, which is important. And there is aldosterone, which is important. And the good thing I like about that order in terms of the names is it tells you which one triggers the other. So the first rung on the ladder is going to be renin. And where does renin come from? I mean, we don't make renin out of thin air. Renin actually comes from the kidneys. It comes from the kidneys. It comes from your afferent arteriole. In fact, let's be a little more specific here. It comes from a subset of cells at the afferent arteriole that are known as the juxtaglomerular cells, the JG cells, right? And renin, before we talk about its effects, I think it'll be really helpful to discuss some things that can cause you to release more renin. Like, what in the world causes you to release more renin? Well, one thing that can cause you to release more renin is if you're delivering less sodium to your distal tubules. So the thing is, if you think about it, so I just said that the GG cells, they are a subset of cells of the afferent arteriole. The thing is, those GG cells, they lie in very close proximity to certain cells that are a part of your distal convoluted tubule. Those cells are known as the macula densa. The macula densa. So because they are known as the macula densa, they sense sodium. I think of them as like sodium sensors in a sense, right? So they sense how much sodium is in the fluid that's coming through your kidneys. And when they sense that, there is very low sodium coming through the kidneys, then that makes them think, that's probably low blood pressure happening. And if there's low blood pressure happening, then your body is like, we need to make more renin. So it will tell the GG cells, it will signal to them to go ahead and make more renin. Okay? It will signal to them to go ahead and make more renin. And again, you may be like, Divine, why is it that less sodium coming to the macula densa tells us that the blood pressure is low? Well, think about it. Let's just work our way backwards. If you have less sodium coming to the distal tubule, that means not much fluid was filtered at the level of the glomerulus. So you're like, why did I not have much fluid filtered at the level of my glomerulus? Well, surprise, surprise, it's because your glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressures are very low. Okay, because think about it, right? If you have adequate glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressures, you have extravasation of fluid. But if you don't have enough hydrostatic pressures in your glomerular capillaries, then you will not have extravasation of fluid into Bowman space. You will not form any good ultrafiltrate. So what's going to make you not have enough glomerular capillary hydrostatic pressure? Well, surprise, surprise, If there is not adequate amounts of blood coming into the into the glomerular capillaries, right? If there's not adequate amounts of blood coming into the glomerular capillaries, then you won't have enough hydrostatic pressure. So, if there's not enough blood coming in, that means that adequate blood is not coming through the afferent arteriole. That's what causes precisely what I've just described. Okay, so that's why the macular denser, when he sees that, there's not much sodium coming through here, it's almost like a surrogate. It's like a marker for decreased blood pressure. So you want to stimulate more renin release in those circumstances. Now, what else can cause you to make more renin? Well, another thing that can cause you to make more renin is if you have beta-1 stimulation, right? Beta-1 is one of your adrenergic receptors. Remember, it's a G protein coupled receptor. It's a stimulatory G protein coupled receptor. So it increases the activity of adenylate cyclase, which converts ATP to cyclic AMP, and then cyclic AMP activates protein kinase A, right? But basically, that beta-1 receptor, if you activate it, that's going to cause you to release more renin. So obviously, if you're taking a beta blocker, what should a beta blocker do? Beta blockers should bring down your renin. And if beta blockers bring down your renin, you should have hyperkalemia. Actually, that's the mechanism behind beta blockers causing hyperkalemia. Really, as we go through this podcast, I'm going to throw in a lot of very nice integrations that can really, really help you on exams. So just kind of pay attention as we go. Because again, remember, if you make less renin, you'll see why down the line you should have hyperkalemia. We'll describe that later in this podcast. And then another thing that also causes you to secrete more renin is if there's just low blood flow through your renal arteries, right? Just low blood flow through your renal arteries. So let's say, for example, you have like fibromuscular dysplasia, which would be in a younger person, or you have renal artery stenosis, or let's say you're like just systemically hypotensive. All those things are just going to cause less blood to flow to your afferent arteriole. If your afferent arteriole sees that, man, enough blood is not flowing here, those GG cells are going to freak out and they're going to make a lot of renin. And when you make a lot of renin, you kickstart the whole cascade. Okay, you kickstart the whole cascade. So another way you can even think about this is if, for example, a person takes an NSAID, what do you think an NSAID is going to do to the release to your GG cells? Well, theoretically, although there's a lot of varying mechanisms here, so this is something that's really tested. But theoretically, if you took an NSAID will inhibit COX. If you inhibit COX, there will be less prostaglandin production. So instead of having dilation of your afferent arteriole, you have constriction of your afferent arteriole. And if you constrict your afferent arteriole, then there's not much blood that's going to be flowing through those GG cells. They're going to freak out and they're supposed to release renin, right? They're supposed to. It's not something that necessarily happens, but it's theoretically accurate to know that for exams. It's theoretically accurate to know that for exams. So, okay, so we've talked about the things that cause you to release renin. So what in the world does renin do? Well, renin does a few things. The first thing it does is that, or the major thing it does, is that it's a proteolytic enzyme. It cleaves something known as angiotensinogen. It cleaves it to form angiotensin 1. And then angiotensin 1 goes to the pulmonary capillaries. It goes to the pulmonary capillaries. That's where you have ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. Angiotensin converting enzyme will convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, right? Now, one thing I just want to comment on is it's pretty high yield for the USMLE exams to know that your pulmonary capillaries have very good metabolic activity. At least in general, there are two high-yield metabolic activities you need to know that occur in the pulmonary capillaries. Number one is ACE just literally doing its job, converting angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. And number two is also knowing that the pulmonary capillaries have the ability to break down serotonin. This is why people that have carcinoid syndrome, they don't have left-sided heart lesions. They only have right-sided heart lesions because when the serotonin from the carcinoid comes through the pulmonary capillaries, they are metabolized away, right, so that they do not affect the left side of the heart. That's pretty important to know. And one nice question that our friends at the MBMEs, being as smart as they are, can throw on an exam, step 1 or step 2 or step 3, or probably say more so step 1, is they can give you a question where you're supposed to delineate angiotensin 1 and angiotensin 2 concentrations between blood sample drawn from the pulmonary artery versus a blood sample drawn from the pulmonary vein. Well, think about it. Obviously, in the pulmonary artery, the angiotensin 1 level should be high and the angiotensin 2 level should be very low. Why? Because angiotensin 1 has not undergone metabolism yet. And then in the pulmonary vein, your angiotensin 1 level should be very, very low and your angiotensin 2 level should be very, very high. because now you're distal to the pulmonary capillaries. So because you're distal to the pulmonary capillaries, you have converted your angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Again, this sounds like a very benign, very mundane concept, but I promise you in the heat of an exam where you're sweating bullets, you would want to have this thing on your fingertips. So it's not something that you have to keep thinking about, right? So again, after the pulmonary capillaries, angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2. And then that angiotensin 2 does a bunch of stuff, right? I mean, like, it's a pretty amazing compound. The first thing it does is that it's a very powerful vasoconstrictor. Believe it or not, angiotensin 2 is one of the most powerful vasoconstrictors in the human body. I'll say that again. Angiotensin 2 is one of the most powerful vasoconstrictors in the human body. How in the world does it do that? Well, it does that by binding to the angiotensin 2 type 1 receptor. So it's the type 1 receptor, is the angiotensin 2 type 1 receptor. So by doing that, it will bind to that receptor and it will cause a vasoconstriction. Obviously, if you vasoconstrict, that's going to reduce your system. That's going to increase your systemic vascular resistance. Obviously, if you increase your systemic vascular resistance, your blood pressure is going to go up. Now, angiotensin 2 also, especially in the earlier parts of the kidneys, like the proximal tubule, it actually stimulates the reabsorption of sodium. So think about it. If you stimulate sodium reabsorption, then you're going to be stimulating the reabsorption of water. Ultimately, that's going to cause fluid retention. That's going to cause an increase in blood volume. Now, a third thing that angiotensin 2 does is that it goes to the zona glomerulosa of the adrenal cortex. I'll say that again. It goes to the zona glomerulosa of the adrenal cortex. What does it do in the zona glomerulosa? Well, it stimulates the release of aldosterone, right? Aldosterone is a very powerful compound. One of the things aldosterone does is that it increases the activity of the INEC channel, the sodium channel that we find at the principal cell of the collecting duct, on the urine surface of the collecting duct, of the principal cell of the collecting duct. So when you increase the activity of that channel, you're going to reabsorb sodium. As sodium is being reabsorbed, water is going to follow. But it also causes you to excrete potassium into the urine, right? So aldosterone makes you reabsorb sodium and water and makes you excrete potassium. And also aldosterone acts at the level of the alpha intercalated cells. I'll say that again. It acts at the level of the alpha intercalated cells. What in the world does it do at the alpha intercalated cells? Well, it causes you to secrete protons into your urine. So whenever you have a high aldosterone state, you're literally going to be dumping protons in your urine. You're literally going to be dumping protons in your urine. You're literally, I'll say that again, going to be dumping protons in your urine. If you dump protons in your urine, you're going to get a metabolic alkalosis, right? You're going to get a metabolic alkalosis when you have a high aldosterone state. So think about it. If you're taking an aldosterone antagonist, so something like spironolactone or eplerenone, it will then make sense that, this person is going to be getting the opposite of what aldosterone causes. So the person is going to get a hyperkalemia, right? Because instead of getting rid of potassiums in their urine, they're holding them onto them. But they also have a metabolic acidosis, right? They'll have a metabolic acidosis because, instead of getting rid of those protons from the level of the alpha intercalated cell of the distal nephron, they hold onto those protons, right? That's a hypoaldosterone state causing a metabolic acidosis. To be honest with you, that's actually a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis, right? A normal anion gap metabolic acidosis, right? So whenever you have a low aldosterone state, it gives rise to an ANAGMA. If actually it causes an RTA. Let me make it a little more specific. It causes a renal tubular acidosis. More specifically, it causes a type 4 renal tubular acidosis. Let me tell you this. Whenever you see a person that has an RTA and they have hyperkalemia with said RTA, that's a hypoaldosterone state. That's a type 4 RTA. That's kind of high yield to know. Really, I'm telling you, if you pay attention to this podcast, you will absolutely crush many questions on your exams. And another job of aldosterone of angiotensin 2, is that it goes to the posterior pituitary. It goes to the posterior pituitary and causes you to release ADH, antidiuretic hormone. ADH is also called vasopressin. Well, we know that vasopressin, it acts on ADH receptors, the vasopressin receptors, at the level of the principal cell of the collecting duct, and that causes you to reabsorb a lot of fluid from your urine. And also vasopressin, believe it or not, is also a vasoconstrictor. In fact, this is one of the reasons why it is used in people that have septic shock. Although remember, if you have septic shock, you got to start off with norepinephrine first. We usually try norepinephrine as the first line vasoconstrictor. If norepinephrine is not working, you can try epinephrine, you can try vasopressin to help you vasoconstrict and kind of help you out there. And one other thing with angiotensin 2 is it also causes you to have like cardiac hypertrophy. It causes cardiac remodeling. So the thing is, you may be like, Divine, wow, that may point me out to something. Well, what do you think I'm trying to point you out to here? Well, think about it. There are these pesky details about the drugs that are supposed to improve survival in CHF, right? Things like your beta blockers, your aldosterone antagonists, your ACE inhibitors and ARBs. Well, why do you think your ACE inhibitors and ARBs improve survival in heart failure? Well, maybe if you're shutting down cardiac remodeling, maybe if you're shutting down aberrant hypertrophy, that may help your heart, right? So those drugs are pretty good from that perspective. So really, to be honest with you, if you understand all these things I'm mentioning, then you understand the reverse. You'll understand certain markers you get when you take an ACE inhibitor and ARB. And before I delve into those, one thing I just want to say is, if you like the way I explain things, you may be interested in the classes that I offer for the USMLEs. I have a biostatistics bootcamp that's taking place next week, Thursday, on the 15th of December. If you struggle with biostatistics, I'm not, as you can see from my podcast, I'm not big on, let me just give you the material to memorize. No. Most USMLE questions these days for biostats are not memorization questions. They are questions where you actually have to reason through biostats. In fact, sometimes, even if you know the formula, you won't be able to answer the question correctly. So if you want to become a biostatistics expert, I'll strongly recommend taking my biostatistics bootcamp on the 15th of December. If you struggle with test-taking strategies, this is for anyone taking step 1, step 2, or step 3. I have my MBME test-taking strategies course. That's going to be taking place on Friday, the 16th of December. Thousands of people have taken this class and they have found it to be profoundly helpful. And then if you're studying for step 2 or step 3 or complex level 2 or 3, or you're taking your shelf exams and you want like a very good solid overview of most of the high yield things you see on your shelf exams, I will encourage you to take my 20-hour course. It's going to be taking place from the 19th to the 22nd of December. All these courses are going to be taking place through Zoom. And then finally, if you're also, and again, these courses, especially the review course, is going to be based entirely on scenarios. Less than 5% of it is a lecture. Like 95% of it are just straight up scenarios. Because again, your exam is not a bunch of lectures. Your exam is going to be a bunch of clinical scenarios. And you're going to see me integrate things across multiple disciplines to really help you understand the concepts. And then for those that are taking step 1 or complex 1, I have a review class taking place in January, starting on the 5th of January. It's going to be a 5-day class, 5 hours each day, 25 hours total. And the class is a step 1 review. It's a very high yield integrated step 1 review. It's very ideal for people taking step 1 or complex 1. Or if, for example, you're a person that's taking complex 2 or complex 3 or step 2 or step 3, and you have a poor clinical science foundation. To be honest with you, even if you don't have a poor clinical science foundation, you'll find the course to be profoundly helpful. The course is going to integrate so many things in clinical medicine across so many disciplines. By the time you're done with the course, you'll feel very comfortable. You'll have a very solid, very excellent knowledge base. So if you're interested in any of these classes, they all take place through Zoom. Shoot me an email and I'll give you some more information and you can reserve a spot for yourself. Okay, so I said I'm going to talk about the opposite of what happens when you take an ACE inhibitor and ARB. Well, if you take an ACE inhibitor and ARB, think about it. They can give you questions on your exams. We have to talk about the effects on like preload, for example. Well, think about it. What's that going to do to your preload? Well, I just said that angiotensin 2 on its own and also through aldosterone makes you reabsorb sodium and water in the nephron. Well, if you're reabsorbing sodium and water, that's going to increase your blood volume. So if you block those effects, you're going to actually decrease blood volume. If you decrease blood volume, then you're going to decrease preload. If you decrease preload, guess what? You're going to decrease cardiac output. And also, if you think about it from the systemic vascular resistance perspective, well, guess what? If you're antagonizing the actions of angiotensin 2, you're going to bring down a person's systemic vascular resistance. You're going to lower their blood pressures that way, okay? You're bringing down systemic vascular resistance, you're going to lower their blood pressures. So if you really think about it, you're bringing down the systemic vascular resistance, you're bringing down the diastolic blood pressure when you take an ACE inhibitor or an ARB. And also, you're bringing down the systolic blood pressure because you're lowering cardiac output when you take an ACE inhibitor or an ARB. So overall, what's the effect going to be on pulse pressure when you take an ACE inhibitor or an ARB? Well, let me tell you a secret. It's going to reduce. It's going to decrease those things. Because think about it. You're causing very major drops, very, very major drops in systolic blood pressure because your cardiac output is going down because your preload is lower. but you're also causing very major drops in your diastolic blood pressure. You're causing major drops in your diastolic blood pressure, right? So overall, the net effect, because I know some people may be like, wow, Divine, if you're only looking at it from the perspective of diastolic blood pressure going down, you'll be like, oh, the pulse pressure should increase. But no, two things go down. Diastolic blood pressure goes down, systolic blood pressure goes down. The net effect is an overall decrease in pulse pressure, right? An overall decrease in pulse pressure. And remember, when you take these ACE inhibitors, especially, maybe not so, in fact, let me not say not ARBs, but ACE inhibitors. ACE inhibitors, what do you think they do to your levels of bradykinin? Well, they're going to raise your levels of bradykinin. If your bradykinin goes up, you're going to get that pesky, non-productive cough that we find with many ACE inhibitors. Usually, we don't get that problem with ARBs because ARBs have nothing to do with ACE. They literally have nothing to do with angiotensin converting enzyme. And I guess while we're on that topic, with angiotensin converting enzyme, remember, levels of ACE will be increased when you have like lung problems, especially like sarcoidosis. Because remember, in sarcoid, you have a lot of inflammation in the lungs. You have those nasty granulomas. So you can make a ton of angiotensin converting enzyme. So ACE is actually pretty high in the lungs in the bloodstream if you measure it in people that have sarcoidosis. Just kind of figured I'll throw that out as an extra point. And then another thing I want to say is that, to this renin angiotensin aldosterone system, there's like a counter-regulatory mechanism. So if you actually look at the atria of the heart, they make something called ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide. The ventricles of the heart, they actually produce something known as BNP, brain natriuretic peptide. That term, brain natriuretic peptide, is a misnomer. It does not come from the brain. It actually comes from the ventricles. So BNP comes from the ventricles, ANP comes from the atria. And the thing is, in general, and I'll comment on ANP because that's the big one they love to go after on exams. But ANP, it does a bunch of things that basically go counter to what the renin angiotensin aldosterone system does, right? Like for example, ANP decreases the production of renin. It decreases renin production. Well, if you decrease renin production, you're going to again pretty much offset its effects. Another thing it also does is it inhibits the INEC channel. ANP inhibits the INEC channel in the principal cell of the collecting duct. If you inhibit that INEC channel, you're not going to reabsorb sodium. So you're going to be wasting sodium in your kidneys. Water is going to follow. That's going to reduce your blood volume, right? That's going to reduce your blood volume. So again, ANP is a very powerful vasodilator. And some of you may be like, man, Divine, like, how do I wrap my head around this? How does ANP cause vasodilation? Well, here's the thing. ANP, when it acts on its receptors, the ANP receptor is a receptor that actually activates guanylate cyclase. So because it activates guanylate cyclase, that's going to cause the conversion of GTP to cyclic GMP. And then cyclic GMP is going to stimulate protein kinase G. Protein kinase G, look at the name, protein kinase G, it's a kinase. So that means it phosphorylates things. Well, one of the things it loves to phosphorylate is myosin light chain phosphatase, right? So protein kinase G phosphorylates myosin light chain phosphatase. When you phosphorylate myosin light chain phosphatase, you're going to activate it, right? Myosin light chain phosphatase is activated when it is phosphorylated, right? So again, when myosin light chain phosphatase is phosphorylated, it becomes active. Well, what does a phosphatase do when it's active? It's going to cleave off phosphate. And what is it going to do? It's going to cleave off phosphate from the myosin light chains. When myosin light chains are not phosphorylated, when the phosphate has been lopped off of them, then it cannot combine with actin, it cannot interact with actin. So you're not going to get any smooth muscle contraction, and the muscle is going to relax. And if the muscle relaxes, if you have smooth muscle relaxation, that's going to cause vasodilation, right? That's going to cause vasodilation, right? So atrial natriuretic peptide is pretty amazing from that perspective, right? And the thing that really makes you release ANP is when your heart muscles stretch, right? So when you have a stretch in the wall of your atria, there are volume receptors in your atria, volume receptors that say, man, this is not good. We need to get rid of some of this blood volume, right? And that's going to trigger the release of ANP, and that's going to cause you to release all that extra volume. And I guess one other thing I can say with this ANP, BNP business, there's an enzyme that happens to break them down. There's an enzyme that happens to break them down. Our friends at the NBMEs actually love this enzyme. It's actually called neprilysin. Neprilysin is an enzyme that breaks down ANP and BNP. And I'm just talking about all these beneficial effects of ANP, BNP, how it reduces blood volume, reduces blood pressure, causes vasodilation. It may be something that may be pretty helpful to a person that has CHF. Kind of sounds logical, because a person that has CHF, they have volume overload. It's probably not a good thing for them to have all that extra volume, because that volume can end up in the lungs and kill them, which is not a good thing. So one way you can temper those effects is you can give a neprilysin inhibitor, right? In fact, neprilysin inhibitors are drugs like sacubitril. I'll spell that sacubitril, sacubitril. Many times, actually, you combine these drugs with an ARB, like valsartan, right? Like valsartan, sacubitril. You combine those two drugs together, and they actually improve survival in heart failure, right? So sacubitril inhibits neprilysin. By inhibiting neprilysin, you're going to decrease the breakdown of AMP and BMP. So since you're decreasing the breakdown of AMP and BMP, you're going to get more of those beneficial AMP, BMP effects. It's actually pretty helpful in people that have heart failure, okay? Pretty helpful in people that have heart failure. Okay, so I think I'm going to go ahead and stop here. Again, I hope you found this podcast to be really helpful. I do offer tutoring for all the USMLE exams, step 1 to step 3, complex level 1 to 3. I do not tutor to OMM. I do not tutor to OMM. And then I also have review courses, as I've described already, for step 1, for step 2, step 3, complex 1 to 3, MBME test-taking strategies courses, biostatistics courses, if you're interested in that. And I also offer help with ERAS applications and mock interviews. Again, I've worked with tons of people along those lines that I found it to be really, really helpful, really, really beneficial. And then I have these podcasts on the major podcast apps, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. I have a YouTube channel, Divine Intervention, USMLE Podcasts and Videos, Divine Intervention, USMLE Podcasts and Videos. I do upload videos on that YouTube channel, so please subscribe to that when you get there. And I also upload versions of my podcasts as well on that YouTube channel. So again, just subscribe there if you're a person that uses YouTube heavily. You can get more productive studying out of your YouTube time by just hitting that up. And then I have another website known as Divine Intervention, USMLE Podcasts and Videos. Divine Intervention, USMLE Podcasts and Videos. Divine Intervention, USMLE Podcasts and Videos. Whoops. Misspoke there. Whoops. I have another website called divineinterventionlifelessons.com. I kept repeating the name of the YouTube channel. My apologies there. But Divine Interventionlifelessons.com. It's a website that I made because many people said, wow, Divine, I really love the life lessons you put at the end of your podcast. So I made a new website, divineinterventionlifelessons.com. I post about 2 podcasts every week. They're about 10 to 20 minutes long, and they use the Bible to describe how to deal with a particular life problem. And many of you know I'm a Christian. So I made this podcast, and again, many people actually subscribe to that, and they find it to be really helpful. In fact, the podcast associated with that is also on Apple Podcasts. It's called the Divine Intervention Life Lessons Podcast. Now, real quick, before I end today, I just want to talk about a quick life lesson, and that's the importance of contentment. Contentment. The thing is, this is something that I know is pretty common in medicine, because medicine attracts a lot of like type A personalities, people that are very driven, people that are very ambitious. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with being driven. There's nothing wrong with being ambitious. But it's also important to just recognize the importance of being content. Because the thing is, when a person is super driven, when a person is super ambitious, they're always striving for more. The thing is, if you have this always striving for more mindset, you will never be satisfied with what you have. And let me tell you this, whenever you're not satisfied in life, you will pretty much never have peace. That is just the truth. Because when you get something and it seems really good, it's going to be good to you for like a day or two. But after the day or two, you're looking for the next thing that's going to drive you, right? You see your scores. You're like, man, I've studied really hard for this USMLE exam. I got a 260. You've studied for it for like 1 year, very driven, everything, crushed it. But then after those USMLE scores come, they will go and you return back to your old state. And then you're looking for the next big thing, right? And the thing is, that behavior just kind of spreads to many other parts, ends up spreading inadvertently to many other parts of like a medical student's life, right? You just are never content with anything. You're never content with anything. So the thing I think I want to say to you here is just ask yourself, like, what gives you joy in life? It's just very important for you to kind of sit down and clarify. What gives me joy? Is it my USMLE scores that give me joy? Is it my family that gives me joy? Is it money that gives me joy? But I will encourage you. There are many things like money, for example, that does not give lasting joy. USMLE scores, I promise you, do not give lasting joy. Doesn't matter how well you've done on the USMLEs. I promise you, after a few years, if you're able to hold on to that joy for a few years, it's gonna wear away pretty quickly. I can tell you that for sure. I'm not saying what I do not know. So I'll just encourage you, like, make sure you focus on things that are more substantial as sources of your joy. And really, maybe one thing I will say is don't let your surroundings really dictate your joy, because if you let your surroundings dictate your joy, man, you're going to be a very unhappy person. You're going to be a very unstable person, because basically your moods are going to yo-yo with the way your environments look like. So if, for example, it's a wonderful day at work, everyone is treating you well, you're crushing everything, you're going to feel good. But then, if it's a dreary day at work, everything is going horribly and things are not going well, then you're going to feel horrible. Or if people treat you well, treat you nicely, they hype you up, you feel good. But if people treat you poorly, you get crushed, right? That's one of the reasons why, like, the media, you shouldn't depend. Let's say you're a star in some way, shape, or form. You shouldn't depend on the media to control your joy. No. Because the media, they're your friends today. So, to be honest with you, I feel like the media is almost like bipolar sometimes. You kind of look at basketball, for example. You have this player, this person is like scoring 30 points a game, absolutely crushing it. Everyone in the media loves you. They're like, wow, MVP candidate. Wow, this person is top 5 in the NBA. Wow, this person is generational talent. But then, when you have like a string of 3 or 4 bad games, they just absolutely just pillage on you. Should this person be traded? Oh, this person is the worst person in the world. Wow, is this person worth their contract? Right? So that's the thing. Like, don't let external things control your joy. Let your joy come from within. I mean, like, as a Christian, there's this part of the Bible that says, rejoice always. Again, I say rejoice. So joy should be a consistent thing for you, right? But it will be your joy will be consistent if it's coming from the inside, if it's not coming from ephemeral things that kind of lie on the outside. So I know I've kind of rambled on for a bit, but again, I hope you find this life lesson to be helpful, because I'm telling you, like, when you are not content, it can really cause you to do some very nasty things in life. I mean, one of the reasons why people commit suicide is because they're just not content with life. So again, I just encourage you, like, just develop that contentment. Regardless of what is going on around you, just tell yourself that, you know what, it's going to be okay. This too shall pass. Just remain content, celebrate your victories, and, if things are not working out the way you want them to work out, just trust that things will get better. But again, and also obviously change your strategy. If you're doing things that are making things not work out well for you, you shouldn't keep doing those things that are making things not work out well for you. That's just kind of common sense, right? But again, I will encourage you, watch where you draw your joy from. If you draw your joy from things that change, like shifting shadows, you're not going to have long-term peace. But if you're drawing your joy from the inside, from things that have like lasting value, you're very likely to be a little more stable in life. So thank you for listening to me today. I'll see you in the next podcast. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and God bless you. Bye for now. Thank you.